Alright, so in this lesson, we're going to be talking about conditional statements and more on truth tables, alright? We're going to look at how do we use the conditional statement and how do truth tables show the truth value of simple and compound logical statements. And you're like, what? Don't worry, we'll get into that. We just need to go over conditional statements beforehand, alright? Alright, so before we get into that, I want to go over what negation, conjunction, disjunction means, because in order to do these truth tables later on, you need to have this down and refer back to it over and over again, all right? Negation, again, was not P, right? So basically the opposite of whatever P is. In this case, if it was true, then it's false. If it was false, then it's true, right? Conditional statements, P and Q, right, is true if and only if P is true and Q is true. So the only one that is true is the top part. So this is only true, and this is going to be a big false. So I'm just going to put a big F right here. All right. Disjunction is P or Q is true if and only if P is true or Q is true or both, right? So at least one of them have to be true, and all the first three are true, and the last one is false, right? At least one of these are true, these are both false, so it has to be false. So a conditional statement reads like this: P implies Q, or if P, then Q happens, all right? So if we're looking at some example, let's say P is equal to it's raining, or it is raining, sorry, and Q is I will bring an umbrella, then what the conditional statement would be is that if P, or well, P given Q, and that's what it is, if it is raining, then I will bring an umbrella, all right? So notice, you guys, that the P and the Q are its statements above here, right? It's not, P is not if it is raining, and Q is not if or then I will bring an umbrella, right? P and Q do not change at all. It is this sign, all right, that makes it if and then. Whoa, my bad. All right, so please make sure of that, because later on I'll ask you guys what is the P statement, what is the Q statement in the conditional statement, and you're going to have to say it is raining, not if it is raining. If you say if it is raining, then that would be wrong, all right? So let's look at down here. In this case, if he passed, then he studied, right? So we want to see what the P statement is and what the Q statement is, right? The P statement would be he passed, and the Q statement would be he studied. And again, it's not if he passed, and it's not if or then he studied, all right? So make sure of that. Please take note of that. So just with all the other statements, the conditional statement also has a rule to follow, right? If P then Q is true always, well, I'm sorry, let me read that again. If P then Q is true always, as in they're always true except for when P is true and Q is false. All right, so let me read that again. It's always going to be true except for when P is true and Q is false. All right. In other words, instead, when the first statement is true and then the second statement is false. All right. So make sure that when the first statement is true and the second statement is false, then it is false. All right. So let's look at the truth table right now. If it's always going to be true except for when P is true and Q is true. So if we look at this, P is true here, Q is false here, then this has to be false, right? Everything else, because like it said, it's always going to be true, so everything else is going to be true. So again, when the first statement is false or true, right? This is the first statement and this is the second statement. When the first statement is true and the second statement is false, then it is false, all right? So please take note of that. That is very important, because that gets confusing later on, and they will not give you this on the formula sheet. I don't think so, all right? So in the conditional statements, we have the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive, right? And you guys have seen this in geometry, hopefully, but they're very simple to understand. Converse, basically you flip the Q and the P, and it just becomes if Q then P instead of if P then Q, right? Inverse, all you do is negate both of them, do not flip it. And the contrapositive, all you do is flip it and then negate it. All right. So let's look at this example. If it is raining, then the game will be canceled, right? Again, P is not if it is raining, it's just it is raining, right? Q, the game is canceled. All right, so let's look at the converse. The converse, we just flip the P and the Q around, and we have if the game is canceled, then it is raining. All right. The inverse, we don't flip it, we just negate it, and this is how it goes. If it is not raining, then the game is not canceled, right? And the last one, the contrapositive, we flip it, then negate both of them. If the game is not canceled, then it is not raining. All right, so please write these down because you guys will be asked about this later on. So in some questions on the test or the quizzes or whatever, they'll ask you guys which statements are logically equivalent. And this is how you're going to prove that they're logically equivalent. All right. The conditional statement we already went over is that it's always going to be true except for when the first one is true and the second one is false, right? This applies to the converse, contrapositive, and the inverse, all right? So let's look at the converse first. The converse, it's always going to be true except for when the first one is true and the second one is false, right? So now be careful when you look at this, right? The first two, they're both true, so it has to be true, right? So now here we have true, false, right? But remember that we're looking at Q first and then P. So Q, then P. So that's not in the rule, so this is also going to be true. Here we have Q is true, then P is false, right? So let's look at this. Let me just write this down. This is going to be first, and we're only going to look at that first and second. So this is first, this is true, and this is false. So that goes under that rule, and so this has to be false, right? The last one, everything else is going to be true. All right, so please remember that. So let's write these two down, copy this down, pause it if you have to, all right? So again, I told you from the last section that these will always be true, false, or true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false. That's a F, and this is false, all right? So always going to be true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false, right? It's a pattern. It's kind of like a combination like when we did the subsets, all right? So here, all we need to do now is write down the not P's and the not Q's, right? So the not P's, we're looking at this column, right? So this is, let's say, the first column, and this is the second column. So the first column, not P, would be, let's do this in blue, false, false, true, and true, right? If we did not Q, this would be false, true, false, true. All right, now we're going back to the conditional rule, right? Everything's going to be true except for when the first one is true, and in the new one, this is going to be first and this is second, and we're only looking at these two columns, all right? It's always going to be true except for when the first one is true and the second one is true, right? So this one is obviously true, true. First one is true, second one is false, and that's going to be false, all right? And then true, true, that's going to be true. All right? Let's look at the contrapositive. We have true, true, false, false, and then we have true, false, true, false, right? Again, we're going to look at the opposite, the negation, false, false, true, true, and then false, true, false, true. And I know this sounds tedious right now, but for the most part, this you will not have to do. I think they give it to you, and then some of this stuff they will be filled out. You just have to fill in the rest, all right? Here we're looking at if not Q, then not P, right? So this is going to be your second term, and this is going to be your first, right? The contrapositive, we flipped it, then we negated it, right? So we're looking at this column first, and then this column second, right? Always going to be true except for when the first column is true and the second column is false. So this is the only one that has the first column true, the second column false. So this is going to be false. Everything else is going to be true. All right? So now you're probably like, how does it make it equivalent? All right? In this case, if you look, this truth table is true, false, true, false, true, true. This is true, false, true, true, right? So these two are equivalent. This one down here is true, true, false, true. This is true, true, false, true. So these two are equivalent, all right? This last column, you guys, on all of these are very important in order to tell if they're valid or if they're equivalent, or basically your conclusion. This last column is very important, right? All right, so the last statement I want to go over is the if and only if, right? P if and only if Q, right? This is always going to be true only when P and Q are both true or both false, all right? Both true or both false. So in this case, they have to be both true or both false. These are both true, so it's going to be true. These are both false, so it's going to be true. Everything else is going to be false, all right? Keep this in mind. All of these little truth tables that we did today and the last day or the last notes, please keep that with you because you will use this when we get into those huge truth tables, all right? So just like in algebra, we have orders of operations, all right? What you're going to see is something like down here at the bottom where the statements get a little longer and a little bit more complex, right? What you want to do is look at how many statements that you have. Look to see if you have parentheses, all right? So work from the inside out. Do the negations and then work left to right, all right? Try to follow the steps. If not, try to pick it by piece, all right? That makes it a lot easier. So let's look at this example. We have not P and parentheses P or Q, all right? So we're looking at the truth value of this, and that is at the end right here, and this is again very important right here, all right? So not P, let's do the not P first since we already have our P. Not P would be false, false, true, true, right? And that's pretty easy. We don't have to change anything on that. So P or Q, all right? So we're going to take this section, the parentheses first, P or Q. And remember, P or Q is going to be true all the time except for when they're both false, right? So true all the time except for when they're both false, right? So false, false, so it's got to be false. So now, if we're looking at the statement altogether, we're going to look at these two columns, right? So this is going to be first and this is going to be second, all right? So let's look at this. It's not P and not Q. So the rule that you're going to follow is the and rule, all right? The and rule, and if you need to refer back to that, that's the and rule, that's the conjunction rule, right? So look at that, and that rule is P and Q is true if and only if P is true and Q is true, so they both have to be true at the same time, all right? So these are both not true at the same time, so this is false. Not true at the same time, this is false. True at the same time, so this is true. Not true at the same time, so this is false, all right? This right here tells us if it's valid or not. And the way we know it is that if it is all true, then it is valid, or they call it a tautology. If it is not all true, then it's not valid, all right? So please copy this down. You're going to be doing this kind of stuff in class. All right, so this is the last thing. I want you to copy this down. I want you to try this. Please try this. I will check to see if you have this done at least. But please try this. I've given you guys the steps to write everything out. All you guys need to do is fill out if it's true or if it's false in the correct boxes. All right, so again, please write this down, study it, bring it in for class, and we'll go over it. All right, that's it.